Good evening and welcome to the final Beyond the Front Page for the fall 2019 semester here at Cayuga Community College. This is a show that's broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as the college's radio station 89.1. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. We are delighted to have back in our studio someone who was a regular fixture at our interview table, former New York State Senator John DeFRANCISCO. Senator DeFRANCISCO announced about 19 months ago that he was ending a career in the Senate that started in 1993. He held one of the three Senate seats representing Cayuga County starting in 2013 with redistricting. The senator has a new book out, Never Say Never, Adventures in New York State Politics, that you can purchase on Amazon.com. It's in paperback for $14.95 and on Kindle for $8.95 at Amazon.com. It's a great read. The chapters do not flow consecutively necessarily, so you can read great stories along the way. The senator joins us to talk about this book, and we might even get into a little bit of politics and current events. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me.
I thought the next time you would be back here, you would be with a saxophone, because that's what we talked about when you retired. The college would have you on sound waves, but we're delighted to have you here to talk about your book. What brought this on?
The saxophone or the book?
The book. We're going to talk about the book first.
All right. I really started about 3 years ago. When I got to the point where I was getting close to retirement, I thought it'd be a good idea to start chronicling some of the things I've done and some of the interesting stories, some funny, not so funny, about the 41 years in elected office. And I just kept an ongoing dialogue with a piece of paper. And then ultimately, after I retired, I edited it and re-edited it.
Yeah, they're not as short as a James Patterson chapter book, but they are fairly short pieces. There's no 35-page chapters on a budget.
Well, that's true, but there are, as you mentioned, I think that's important to mention. You can pick up the book and go to any chapter. It doesn't necessarily follow from the last one. And the first quarter of the book is really getting there. In other words, how you run for political office.
So almost a primer for somebody who wants to go into public service.
Yes, it's amazing how many people I've met that are already candidates. They had no clue what to do, what the first step is. So that was the first quarter of the book. Information about my 17 successful campaigns. And then after that, the last three quarters is being there. Some of the interesting things that happen.
So do you abide by the Harry Truman axiom that when he first got to the Senate in Washington, somebody said to him, well, the first 6 months, you're going to wonder how you got there, and then after that, you're going to wonder how everybody else got here.
That I've seen, but how I got there. But then the next real question was, after winning some of these elections, now what? And there's a chapter on that. There's different.
So 17 and 0.
17 and 0.
So I want to go back to this. This is your second book.
Correct.
What was the first book on?
The first book was called What Happened to This Child. I was a criminal defense attorney and represented one of the two parents that were charged with murder after their child around Christmas time was found dead from dehydration and malnutrition. And it was a very high-profile case in Central New York, and I was in office, city council then. So it talks about...
What was the result of the case?
The case was an acquittal, and the aftermath was even as interesting as the trial itself, and it goes through each step of the trial from when I first met them to jury selection to final verdict. And the aftermath was very vicious in that the sheriff at that time, John Dillon, basically said, how stupid could the jury be and the like, which kind of got my dander up a little bit, and I thought they should be defended, and it's in that book. That was self-published.
So you said that back then, or you said you would never write another book again.
That's why I never say never. Never
so it's not a reference to a Sean Connery not doing James Bond movies.
No. What it is I said I would never run for office because when I came back from Syracuse after the Air Force, I went to the DA's office and there was this mini scandal in the office and the DA had to resign. And I thought it was so ridiculous that it was really unwarranted. And I said, I'm never going to do this. And sure enough, I've done it. I did it for 41 years.
So was this cathartic?
No, it was just, I just thought I had things that people might want to know. I fought the Destiny deal for years, not because we didn't want more business there, but because the deal was ridiculous in my mind, and still do. And I talk about some of the backstories.
So you have 2 chapters on Destiny there. You just thought it was a bad deal for taxpayers.
Bad deal.
So I want to go back to the book in a second, but while we're on this subject, you have paid attention to economic development. That was a bad deal. Has economic development, the process from a government point of view, gotten better in the last couple of years?
It's difficult to say. Under Andrew Cuomo, we were throwing money away at anything, whether it was a viable project or not, and many of the projects fell apart. So I don't know.
So you consider that being the Regional Economic Development Councils?
Well, some of his, the councils were really window dressing. Everybody would get in together and try to get some of their projects.
But Albany still had
really, Cuomo made all the decisions, and most of them politically.
Do you think that the downtown revitalization initiatives, these DRIs, where $10 million is going to Auburn, Cortland, Fulton, Oswego, now I think Seneca Falls, which is a village, is now getting $10 million for their downtown. Is that a good way to do economic development?
No, because it's basically depending upon where the region is that he needs some support politically. That's where that's who gets it. And
it worked out really well in Buffalo.
Well, that's not true.
I'm being sarcastic. No, I'm sorry. I'm being flippant.
No. It worked out if you look at his motive. When he ran against Palladino, he got hammered in Western New York. And what's the big project that he announces as soon as he has his first budget? $1 billion for Buffalo. They had no idea what they were going to do with that money or if he could find anything. But that would help blunt the bad showing he had in that election.
Do you think, are you surprised there haven't been more convictions, or are you surprised there were any convictions?
In the Buffalo
case and some of this economic development core, some of the other cases that have come up?
It's difficult. It's really difficult to say because I don't know the details of the criminal aspect of it. I never
But
got
when you
into
ran
that.
for governor, you did show up on the court steps of where one of the cases was in New York City, if I remember correctly. Is New York State government more transparent today than it was, let's say, 15 years ago, or in 1993?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think it's always going to be a political process, and whether you have regional economic development councils, and then the governor makes the decision, or the governor makes the decision at the outset, it's going to be a political decision. Unless, the best way for economic development in New York State, and I've said it over and over, is to cut taxes and get government out of the business's hair, and so they could make the business and make the development.
So the second part of the book, or the last 2/3, is about how Albany works or doesn't work. Would you agree with Bismarck's theory that laws are like sausage, better not to see them being made?
I never knew Bismarck.
Before your time?
I mean, you're giving me too much history here.
Okay. This is different than a government show.
No, that's really true. That's really true. What he said in that there's, I hate to say,
I know
quid
Professor.
pro quo.
No, but I know Professor Benjamin had a book about made the comparison. It's just if the public saw what you talk about in here, what would they think? Because remember, you know 90% of people, while you'd like to sell all those books, 90% of the people who pay attention to Albany pay attention either if there's a crisis, a conviction, or it's 2 weeks before Election Day.
Well, this basically tells what I believe the backstories were on many, many issues, whether it be Destiny, whether it be Spitzer's downfall, whether it be whatever has been in the news. There are chapters on many, many of those situations. And it goes to the local level, too, because, the stadium in New York, in Syracuse, was put out in the same location as the former MacArthur Stadium. It should have been downtown, like most every other city at that time was doing. It could have been helping to revitalize downtown and have events down there rather than moving people to the suburbs. So there's a lot, and I tell you what exactly happened and made that decision.
So you have a little bit of an expertise in baseball, if I remember correctly. You were on SU's.
I was the captain
in
19. I won't tell you what.
Okay, so 19-something. It's before 2000. Let's put it that way.
That's
Are you surprised with all the talk that's going on right now with minor league baseball and closing stadiums like Auburn? Or not closing stadiums, but getting rid of the teams, I should say.
Well, it's all economics, and if you don't need that, if you're paying exorbitant salaries, nothing like the salaries that were paid years ago, exorbitant salaries, you got to cut somewhere. And they're lucky in basketball, because basketball, their farm teams are colleges.
Colleges, right.
But now it's very difficult to support many lower teams, and as a result, they're cutting back, and they've got to pay the salary somehow.
Back to the book. How long did it take you to write formally? I know you said you several months ago, several months before leaving.
I started about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And had different chapters pretty much done. But really, this last year since I've been retired, that was the hardest part. Trying to put it together, trying to design the cover, trying to.
So is Amazon an easy way to put a book together? I
think that's something people should know about. If you've got a manuscript, I did self-publish my first book, and if you self-published back then, you had to pay for printing the book and so forth.
And distribution is all on you.
It's very very difficult. And now, if you've got a manuscript, you could go to Kindle Direct Publishing, which is part of Amazon. You could download your manuscript, design your book, and literally the cost is nothing for the most part, because what happens is they only print the number of books that sell. And so you're not getting a backlog of a cost to you. So if people have an idea for a book, they should look at Kindle Direct Publishing.
Have you any idea how many books you've sold?
Now it's short of 2 months, probably about 350, 360.
How many do you hope
like
to sell?
As many as I can sell. And if I don't, I did what I said I would do, and I'm happy that those who bought it are giving me great feedback.
And each of your grandchildren will get a signed edition.
Well, it's too early for stocking stuffers.
Okay. No, but I meant eventually they will get copies.
Yeah,
so, did you consult anyone in writing this?
No.
Did you have anybody proofread it?
Oh, yes. Many people proofread it, and many, including myself, many times. And yeah, that's why the editing part takes the long.
So the editing part, sometimes it's always. I always knew this from newspaper columns. Was some of my favorite parts are the things that I had to leave out. Maybe because of length, because they didn't really jive into that. Anything that you cut out that you wish, because it's about
380 something.
380.
And no, I didn't cut any story out that I wanted to put in. Sometimes after the second or third reading, maybe I'm a little tough on this person. Maybe I'm not being demonstrative enough. I don't know. So the tone changed either way, depending upon what I felt as I finally read what it came out in the drafts.
So we're taping this 2 days before Thanksgiving. It's going to show the night before you have a book signing on December 4th at the Auburn Public Theater.
December 4th at the Auburn Public Theater at 7 o'clock. December 2nd at Barnes & Noble in Syracuse.
And DeWitt. So on the Auburn Public Theater, is it just book signing, or will you give a talk?
Oh, I'm going to speak, answer questions, and those that want to buy it, I'll sign it if they want.
This book came out in September, so how many book signings have you done so far?
None.
Oh, so these are the first two?
No.
Because I know you've been traveling.
I've been traveling, and which is a wonderful thing when you retire. Things you don't normally see, you get to get around a little bit.
Well, for being in the Senate from '93 through last year, that kind of ties you down. There's no grand trips you can take, because there's a political calendar and a legislative calendar and a practical calendar.
And you run every other year.
So any reaction from some of your former colleagues? We had Pam Helming, who was on last week. She said many of her staff had read it. She has it. She hadn't gotten through it yet. But any reaction from your old colleagues?
Oh, yes. I've had several reactions, all positive.
Okay.
But from people that I knew for years, they read it, and the main thing that they said, I knew about this issue, but I had no clue the backstory on many of these things. And one person says, getting back to Destiny, I never realized what a horrible deal it was, although I was explaining it for years and years. And so I think it's gotten positive results. I haven't had anybody call me and say, "You SOB, you never should have told that story."
By the way, we'll get to the governor in a few minutes. Then. Back on the destiny thing, just not necessarily about destiny, but about the people tell you that they didn't know the full story. Are we in such a period of time? You know, newspapers. I see ESPN magazine went out of business yesterday. Governing magazine, which was a Bible to many state legislators and others, went out 2 months ago. Everybody's going out of business. It's tough when something like Destiny, which is tough to explain, you get a 30-second soundbite on 3, 5, or 9 or Spectrum, or you can maybe get a quote or two in a Post-Standard story.
Well, the hard part about it, and you know, there were so many articles that I was a naysayer in the newspaper. And I wrote back many times, and the paper put in my responses, and they were good about that. But when you're, you know, trying to get your point across, when they've got barrels of ink at the paper, and Jim Reith at the time on WSYR radio, it was like a marathon, like a Jerry Lewis telethon for Destiny.
They were all in support of this.
They had drank the Kool-Aid, and very much so in support.
So talk about your colleagues. I understand besides in Cuyahoga County, it's just not Robert Harding and myself from the Citizen who are political junkies. For Central New York political junkies, what's their response to this?
I haven't got much of a response from the local people. Now, whether they bought the book or not, I have no idea.
But they can next Sunday or next Monday or next Wednesday.
Or today by going to Amazon.
I noticed something, and we talked about this beforehand. There's no index. So you know that many people, when a book comes out in Washington, the first thing they do is go over to Kramer Books, and everybody doesn't go to the beginning contents. They go right to the end. There's a table of contents because they want to know if their boss, or more importantly, their enemy is mentioned here. There is no index. So is that because that's something you would have had to do in conjunction with Amazon? Amazon may not allow it. Or is it to make sure that people buy the book because they got to find their names?
No, it wasn't that. I just didn't do it. I didn't think it added anything to it. And if people want to read it, they can read it. If they don't have to. But once enough people read it, the word gets out whether someone's in the book or not. I'm a little shocked that Pam Helming's staff has read it and she hasn't found the time in the off season to read it herself. But maybe that's an indication she doesn't like it. I don't know.
well, let's talk about some other people who might not like it.
Okay.
So I want to talk about the state of New York, and we're going to come back to local, to central New York. But what do you think the state of New York is right now?
Well, it's pivoted to the left substantially since the last election, and it's going to be very difficult to pivot back in view of the fact that there's redistricting after the next election, the 2020. And if it's ever redistrict, if the Democrats, which is likely, maintain control of the Senate, as
they have roughly 40 seats now. There's a question of whether they're going to try to pick up the seat that your successor, Mr. Antonacci, is leaving next month to go to the Supreme Court. We'll talk about that in a moment. That might be a 41st. I know there's 2 other targeted seats they're looking at. Could it only get worse for Republicans?
It's likely to get worse because contributions go to the majority party mostly, but more importantly, the Democrats for years have never had to worry about anything near New York City. Now, over time, much as many people feel it's because Trump is so hated and Republicans are so hated in New York State that it's likely to continue. And once that majority remains the same after the next election, they redistrict, and it'll be 2-1 Democrat in the Senate, just like it is in the Assembly.
So the state voters passed a referendum in 2014 to make redistricting more independent. You buy that?
There's a chapter on that in the book. No, I don't buy that because the fact of the matter is that the party in control is going to make the decisions, whether there's a separate commission or not. And it'll be interesting to see, quite frankly, whether the Democrats, now that they're in the majority, are going to be demanding
as reform-oriented as they might have been before.
And demanding this independent citizens group. But anyway, they're going to appoint
Well, you were
them.
there for the 2009 coup. So you were in the minority for a couple of months, maybe 8 months that year. Then there was the coup, where you had 2 Democrats come over. being in the minority stinks. There's another word I would say, but
I know what you're going to say.
Okay, but
and it's true because we were in the minority 2 years, in 2009, 2010, and you can't do anything as a member of the minority.
So when you went back to the majority, did Republicans feel that they needed to change the system, or did it just go back to the old system where minority is minority, majority is majority?
Well, it was more open after that because our majority was so slim. We had to rely on Democrats, and it turned out
to get support for
yeah,
things.
it turns out those Democrats were the independent Democrats that no longer exist.
I want to ask you about the budget because I know you've been a budget hawk in the sense of financing. There's stories related this week that the New York State looks like going into April 1st, we're not there yet, could be high as $6.1 billion a gap. Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not, because if we're providing college tuition for illegal aliens or undocumented people,
So separate from Excelsior,
yeah, there's
which
more,
is free college.
That's correct. So there's more programs that are being fostered. As a result, and the economy isn't doing as well in New York as it is in other states. So that's and when you got both houses looking to spend money on programs, it's tough. Most governors loved it. Democrat governors, when there was a Republican counterbalance, because then they can blame the Republicans for trying to be more
But he's
fiscally
moved
conservative.
left, you would think, both fiscally and on social issues.
Correct.
By the way, do you know if he's got a copy of your book?
I doubt it, but I doubt it. But I'm sure somebody in his staff has read it.
So there's been, when Joe Biden was dragging in the polls a couple weeks ago because of this whole issue with Ukraine, and we'll get to that maybe a little later, there was talk about the governor rethinking whether to run again. Joe Biden is a little bit back up in the polls now, but do you think Andrew Cuomo, if Joe Biden sinks a little bit more, might get back in?
No, it's too late now. Despite the fact that Bloomberg just got in, he's got
too many New Yorkers.
He's got a unlimited money. At least Bloomberg does, and Cuomo doesn't. And Cuomo's not an old man, at least in respect to me. 4 years comes pretty quick.
So do you think he will eventually run for president?
Oh, he'll definitely try. There's no doubt about it. And if he thought there was an avenue this year, I'm sure he would have done it.
So he might be under the third-term curse now with this $6.1 billion headed in. It only gets worse. We found with other governors over history, not so many history letters. Do you think this is his last term as governor?
Yes,
you do.
I'm sure he. The worst thing that could happen to him in his mind would be to lose something. And he's been very successful in campaigns, and he wants to leave a winner, and I'm sure you're going to see the next time that he's unlikely to run.
I want to talk to you about your old district. Bob Antonacci succeeded you. He's now, we mentioned, going to the state Supreme Court. Do you know why he decided to run for the Supreme Court?
I haven't talked to him since election night. The year he got elected to the Senate. I have no idea what his rationale is.
Okay, so no idea whether it was being the minority status, is it not?
I have no idea.
So there was an issue about redistricting. I know the Citizen did a piece, two pieces, one a story and then one an editorial. I want to talk about both. One was that when redistricting came up in 2011, you were opposed to it because it left out the town of Onondaga, which he lived in. Why did you oppose it at that point?
Well, I opposed the independent commission because I think it's clear that whatever they do independently, the Constitution requires the legislature to do redistricting. So you could call it whatever you want.
This is 2011.
It's more. So that's part one. Part two, I always felt that Bob Antonacci would have been a perfect candidate for this seat.
So how do you respond to the Citizen in their editorial? I think they used the word abuse, that you abused your position by opposing redistricting because it left him out.
I opposed the independent redistricting. I made recommendations to change the district lines, and I think I had an obligation at that time to try to at least give someone the opportunity that I thought could keep my seat, and that's what I was doing at that time. And I don't think it abuses the system. Redistricting is a political decision, and that's what it always was, and it always will be.
Were you surprised, by the way, when he decided not to run for the
Yes,
Supreme Court?
yes, I was. But the fact of the matter is, with respect to district lines, it didn't say he was going to be the candidate.
Right.
It gave an opportunity for him if he chose
But you
it.
can be looking to the long term to say, these are the people I'd like to see
Yeah,
possibly
of
run.
course, and it's in the book, too. You can read it again.
He was the favorite to succeed you a year ago. Is there a favorite now? Because there's likely going to be a special election maybe as early as April.
No one has really come forward yet on the Republican side that I know.
Is there anybody you like out there?
I'd rather stay out of that, because then I just think it's not up to me any longer. I'm no longer in politics.
Would you go back?
I can tell you unequivocally the answer is no.
Because the divorce
41 years
No, I was
is
going to ask
plenty.
you whether the divorce attorney had already been called.
No, my wife was content being away from me as much as she could.
Well, so a question on John Mannion. He announced he's running. Do you think, and he came close. You said it. You said you thought that was a closer race than you thought.
Exactly.
Do you think he has the advantage going into April at this point?
Well, of course, and especially if the April election is the same as the Democrat primary. There'll be many Democrats showing up that normally wouldn't at that for a special election.
So you expect the governor's going to do that?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind that he will. But then again, he's done things I'm surprised about.
So can I ask you, you mentioned redistricting. We got about a minute and a half, and I want to go to one other thing too. But is there an advantage for a county like Cayuga to have, they had 3 congressmen in the 90s, 3 assemblymen in the 2000s, and now 3 senators. Is there an advantage to a community like that?
Oh, definitely, because you got more weight in budget decisions, and you got 3 of those representatives pushing money in your direction. And we would have been better off in Cayuga County if there was a Senate majority leader that represented Cayuga County.
So the flip side of that, though, the alternative would be somebody would say, well, then that means that all 3 can pass the bucket. Somebody else's responsibility. There's nobody one strong. You don't buy that.
No,
Senator.
I don't buy that.
So I want to ask you about, real quickly, we're going to finish up. Is
this the lightning round now?
This is the lightning round.
Okay.
Have we not done our lightning round yet? I know that was always your favorite part. So what have you been doing besides writing a book? You were in Sicily?
We've been traveling a lot. We were in the Mediterranean, we're in Sicily, we were all over the place. And basically, I'm playing tennis and golf, one or the other every day, sometimes both, down in Florida. And as I've told everybody, retirement is underrated.
And would you ever go back into public service?
No.
So you did Sicily. Any other travel plans coming up with family?
We'll be going back out to California. My daughter's out there. We'll be going to different short trips, golfing trips and things like that. We now don't have to plan 6 months in ahead. We can just, in a couple of weeks, decide we're going here. So we don't have any at this moment.
So we start with the book and the saxophone, or music. Are you still playing music?
I'm practicing now a little bit, and I don't know where I'm going to end up bringing the sax out, but it's a great thing to do, and it's in your free time.
So our guest has been former State Senator John DeFRANCISCO. We are delighted that you were back. Like I said at the beginning, I thought you'd be back on Soundwaves before you came back here. His book is Never Say Never, Adventures in New York Politics. You can buy it on Amazon.com for $14.95. It is a very quick read, or Kindle for $8.95. Today, by the way, ends our fall 2019 season, but both Inside Government with Guy Cosentino and On the Front Page will return in February for the spring 2020 semester with shows on public health regarding lead in this community, as well as smoking and vaping, and the building of a new Veterans Memorial. The Auburn Regional Media Access will be having a discussion about that, and we will possibly have a Democratic Congressional Primary Forum here, as well as our 2020 Auburn School Board Forum. As we plan for the spring season, we would like to let you know that you can send us your ideas for guests or topics to cover, or even questions to Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. You can do that at COZGUYTHO@AOL.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. Before we depart, though, I do want to thank the staff and the students here at Cayuga for making this show possible. Specifically Steve Keeler, Mike Morano, Doug Brill, and Jeff Sasniak, who make us all sound and look good, though they could take most likely 10 pounds off. That would be helpful in the visuals, but they are great to work with, and we want to thank them. I'm Guy Cosentino. We want to thank you for watching this season. We hope you have a happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year, and of course, we hope you have a great Thanksgiving this week. I'm Guy Cosentino for Keokee Community College. We want to thank you for watching. Have a great new year.